Written in Bone, Chapter 1, A Grave Mystery. On August 16, 2005, the air temperature on the bank at the Jamestown River in Jamestown, Virginia, hovered at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 38 degrees Celsius. Sunlight flooded the beige-colored soil. At the bottom of a carefully excavated pit, the rounded surface of a human skull gleamed with a yellow-brown luster. The teeth shone white against the darker jawbone and the brownish soil beneath. The skeleton's leg bones stretched long and straight toward the end of the grave. In contrast, the arms were chaotically bent. The left arm lay across the body with the right flung up toward the shoulder. Who was this person? There was no gravestone to offer a name, no signs of a coffin, no pieces of clothing, no buttons, nothing to identify the remains. Only bones. Yet the small group of scientists who'd gathered a few inches from the pit's rim were confident they were about to learn more. One of them, Douglas Owsley, positioned himself next to the grave and studied the skeleton. He looked at the skull, particularly the teeth. Then he scrutinized the ends of each leg bone and arm bone. He examined the pelvis, the part of the skeleton formed by the bones of the hip and lower backbone. It didn't take him long to reach a conclusion. He was about 15 years old when he died, and he was European, Owsley told the others. Puzzles of the Chesapeake. The scientists who found the boy's grave had spent years working at several extraordinary sites in the Chesapeake Bay region. This area includes the modern states of Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. The Chesapeake is of special interest to people who study U.S. history because colonists built the first permanent English settlement in North America here more than 400 years ago. The lives and deaths of these settlers have long intrigued historians and scientists. Most early colonists could not read or write, so the historical record, a term used by historians to refer to documents written by people of the past, contains little information about them. Historians have read and reread the surviving written records from the colony's earliest days. These materials contain fascinating information about the settlers and their adventures, but they don't tell the whole story. Archaeologists try to fill in the gaps in the historical record. They study buildings and man-made objects called artifacts, created by people who lived in the past. They also study the remains of people left behind. As they find, excavate, and analyze these objects, including skeletons, archaeologists help us understand the past more fully and reclaim the histories of individuals who had been forgotten with the passage of time. The interpretation of skeletal remains is a specialized branch of science known as forensic anthropology. The word forensic refers to the use of science and technology to help provide evidence or facts in a court of law. Anthropology is the scientific study of human beings and their ancestors. A forensic anthropologist, then, is a specialist who examines skeletons for clues that will provide evidence about the life and death of the people to whom they belonged. The skills these scientists use to help solve crimes and provide evidence in court are also perfectly suited to the study of human remains of centuries past. Note: historians and archaeologists had no idea who was buried in this grave when it was discovered at Jamestown in 2005. This note is referring to this picture right here. Here we have a map of the major English settlements in Colonial Chesapeake region 1650. We went over this last week. We used this map key or this map legend to help us learn what these things mean. The red squares are the colonial settlements. So we had Providence, St. Mary's City, Jamestown. The archaeological site was at Harley Knoll. The tales told by colonial skeletons include sickness, sadness, and brain-teasing puzzles. Doug Owsley, one of the world's leading forensic anthropologists, is an expert at coaxing these stories from bones. He can determine through skeletal studies whether a person was old or young, healthy or sick. He can usually tell if the bones belong to a male or a female. Had he or she done hard physical labor? Owsley can often find out. Sometimes the bones even tell him the exact cause of death. Look at this sentence that's highlighted in pink, he's one of the world's leading forensic anthropologists, so he's one of the world's biggest experts in this. And it says that he's an expert at coaxing these stories from bones. He's an expert at pulling information just from bones. The grave of the teenage boy whom Owsley examined was among more than 30 discovered inside James Fort in Jamestown, Virginia. The fort's history dates to early 1607 when a group of men and boys arrived from England in 3 ships. They and their sponsor, the Virginia Company of London, shared the same goal: to get rich. They hoped that the land surrounding the Chesapeake Bay would hold great wealth, especially silver and gold. During the summer of 1607, the settlers built the fort and named their new settlement Jamestown, in honor of the English king James I. Although the fort burned down in January 1608, by April of that year the men had replaced it with another. They also built houses, a church, and storage buildings inside the fort's walls. More colonists journeyed on ships from England, including the first English women in 1608. The year 1619 saw the arrival of the people from Africa, who came to Jamestown unwillingly. Initially, these Africans had been taken forcibly from their homeland and held captive on a Portuguese slave ship. The captain of a privateer, a privately owned ship that captures another ship and claims its cargo, took 50 to 60 of the Africans from their slave ship. About 20 of these people were taken to Jamestown. The historical record is unclear as to whether they lived out their lives as slaves or became free persons. Together, the people of Jamestown built more homes and government buildings, grew crops, operated businesses, raised families, and buried their dead. In their quest for land and riches, the settlers spread out into other areas of the Virginia colony and built plantations. In the 17th century, the word plantation meant farm. Jamestown quickly outgrew the area of James Fort. The materials used in the fort's construction were removed and used for other building projects. By the time the historical record reaches the 1630s, all mention of James Fort is gone. A photograph taken right here. So we have this photograph here, and we have our caption that explains it beneath. A photograph taken in 1852 shows a cart in front of the old church tower that marked the location of the Jamestown settlement. Most historians assumed that James Fort, which had been built nearby, had washed away. Finding the fort. For many years, the crumbling brick tower of a 17th century church stood as the only readily visible remains of the Jamestown settlement. During the late 1890s, a group of women founded an organization, the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, to protect the church ruins. Although the organization's members weren't trained archaeologists, they conducted some investigatory digs in the area. In the 1940s and 1950s, the National Park Service began formal archaeological excavations on the foundations of other buildings at Jamestown and located a cemetery. Over the following decades, many more foundations and thousands of artifacts were uncovered, but no one found the remains of James Fort. Here we have a picture, and the caption underneath it tells us what's going on. In 1994, archaeologist William Kelso and his team broke ground on the excavations of the Jamestown Rediscovery Project. Those early scientists may not have found the fort simply because they didn't expect to, and therefore weren't looking for it. Until the 1990s, almost every historian and archaeologist who studied Jamestown believed the fort's location had been at the eastern edge of the settlement, on an area of land that had been washed away by the James River many years ago. That would mean that no traces of the fort would ever be found. The Jamestown Rediscovery Project proved that theory wrong in 1994. William Kelso, the project's chief archaeologist, pictured above, had his own ideas about the location of James Fort. The members of the Rediscovery Project team studied historical documents and listened to oral traditions, stories that people passed down verbally from one generation to the next. The Jamestown oral traditions indicated that the fort had been near the brick church tower. Careful examination of the land near the tower convinced Kelso that the remains of James Fort had not been lost. We have another picture here with our caption. Among the artifacts Kelso's team uncovered was an early 17th century dagger. The image shows the dagger before cleaning, above, this is it before cleaning, and after extensive conservation, below. So here it is after it's been cleaned. The signet ring belonged to the English writer William Strachey, who lived in Jamestown in 1610. They were merely hidden beneath layers of soil in an area about half a mile, or 0.8 kilometers, west of Jamestown excavations conducted by the Park Service during the 1940s and 1950s. The rediscovery of James Fort was so complex that whole books have been written about it. In fact, any properly executed dig is far more than just a matter of grabbing a shovel and scooping up soil. For example, archaeologists must be mindful of the changes their work creates. Excavation removes soil and other evidence of the past that can never be replaced exactly as it was. Yet new discoveries often prompt scientists to rethink their conclusions about a past excavation. So, they need to be able to review the site as it was before the digging took place. For this reason, archaeologists make precise records, photos, diagrams, and maps during each step of the excavation process. The James Fort dig began with the use of an instrument called a transit to measure and establish a grid of 10-foot or 3-meter squares. This grid enabled the team to precisely identify the areas they excavated and to map the location of every discovery. Next, the archaeologists carefully removed soil from specific squares in measured levels, looking for artifacts. They also watched for changes in the soil's color or texture, which could indicate the presence of features, evidence of past occupation, such as fireplace or wells. The team found all these things and more. Between 1994 and 1996, they uncovered tens of thousands of 17th century artifacts, including pottery, beads, coins, bottles, tools, armor, parts of weapons, and other military objects. Many were dated to periods before 1610, indicating that they were used during Jamestown's earliest days. The excavation also revealed features such as floors, brick fireplaces, trash pits, and wells. These finds, particularly the military objects, seemed to support the idea that the archaeologists had rediscovered James Fort, but they still needed conclusive proof. Here's a picture with the caption, "The artifacts found in wells, such as the one above, plus the surrounding soil layers, helped prove that the site that Kelso was excavating was James Fort." Ultimately, it was not artifacts but soil features that provided proof. The topsoil, or surface layer at Jamestown, is a rich, dark brown material. The layer beneath, called the subsoil, is a dense beige-orange clay. Every time the colonists built a structure or dug a grave, their tools penetrated the subsoil. Even centuries later, signs of their work and the soil disturbances their diggings caused remain as a feature called soil stains. Soil stains are areas colored differently than the soil surrounding them. Through careful digging, the archaeologists exposed lines of circular stains in the soil where William Kelso suspected James Fort lay hidden. The circular stains were the only remaining traces of wooden logs that had been placed side by side, upright into the ground to form walls. This type of structure, called a palisade wall, was often built around a fort to provide defense. Moreover, the lines of soil stains joined together in a triangular shape that matched historical descriptions of the fort's walls. Here was the confirmation the archaeologists had sought. The shape and pattern of the soil stains could have been made only by the palisade walls of James Fort. Within the fort's walls, Kelso's team found artifacts and soil features, as they expected. They also found graves, more than 30 of them.